All right, welcome everybody. My name is Brett Halverson and I'm a program coordinator at Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. Welcome to the Farm to Institution Transformative Efforts session. It's great to have you all here. And today our session host is Meg. And before we get started, I'm just going to quickly run through some of our group agreements for the session. So if everyone could come to the conversation from a place of respect and kindness and try to avoid interrupting others. And just be sure that your Zoom name reflects your first and last name and your place of work or your affiliation and your pronouns. And if everyone could just stay muted until you're called upon or engaging in the conversation. And when you want to speak, use the raise hand feature or feel free to use the chat function as well. And just wanted to let everyone know to note that these sessions are being recorded and we'll be sharing them on our website. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to our facilitator, Peter Allison, who's the Executive Director of Farm to Institution New England. Welcome, Peter. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Brett, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. I'm really excited about this session. I've been talking with the various panelists in different ways over the last 6 months or a year, and continue to be sort of amazed at the innovation and leadership that's happening with farm to institution leaders in Vermont. And I have a great privilege in my job to talk to people and learn about farm to institution efforts that are going around all around New England and to some extent around the country. And I have to say, and it's not just because I'm a Vermonter, but I'm continually sort of impressed by the way that farm to institution leaders in Vermont are really sort of paving the way and modeling some new efforts and initiatives from policy to at the institutional level to collaboration between organizations and institutions in a particular sector, and increasingly looking at opportunities for cross-sector collaboration as well. So today, we're going to get a taste from presenters, speakers, leaders in 5 different institutional sectors, including early childcare, K through 12, higher education, healthcare, and corrections. And we have folks who will be presenting from each of those. Let me share my screen and give you a sneak preview of these folks. I'm hoping you're seeing that. So joining me today on this panel, we have a big, robust crowd, and we've been talking together in planning for this and having actually really interesting conversations, which we'll be giving you a taste of today. We have Trevor Lowell, who also works in a cross-sector way as a farm to institution program manager for the Vermont Agency of Ag, Food, and Markets. Helen Rortbelt, who's the Farm to School and Food Access Program Director at Norfolk Vermont. Cynthia Green, who's the Farm to Early Childhood Coalition Coordinator at Shelburne Farms. Tenley Burlingame, who's the Manager of Patient Food Services at UVM. And her colleague, Leah Pryor, who's the Executive Chef at UVM Medical Center. Annie Rowell from Vermont, the Vermont First Coordinator at Sodexo, working with higher ed. And Brian Matowski, who's the Food Service Supervisor at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. Brian's actually not here in person today, and despite the picture, he's also not fishing. Thanksgiving preparation is the biggest time of year for the corrections food service operations. And so he's really busy today, but he did take time earlier this week to pre-record some comments. So you'll be seeing all these folks live in just a minute. The way we're structuring the session today is basically have 2 general questions for each of the panelists, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for any of your questions and or some general discussion amongst them. And the 2 questions are very basically to tell us a little bit about what's happening in farm to institution in their sector now and in their institutions, and also sort of drawing on what's happened over the last decade. Where has it come, including the last 2 years during the pandemic? In the next question, we'll take a look forward in the same way the Farm to Plate plan is doing right now. What sort of trends, challenges, opportunities do you see coming forward? And I'm hoping there'll be time at the end for also some conversation around where the collaboration between people in different sectors is taking place and what some of the opportunities there are. So with that, I will turn it over to Trevor Lowell from Vermont Agency of Ag to lead us off. Thanks, Trevor.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So as Peter mentioned, I work at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, and my role description, my title is Farm to Institution Program Manager. Primarily, I run grant programs that support different efforts in farm to school, farm to early care, and then farm to institution. So working on supply chain issues, ag literacy, a variety of things to just try to increase awareness and reduce friction in the relationship between Vermont producers and our institutional markets. And I think it's a pretty unique position. There aren't a lot of states that have made such an intentional effort to invest in connecting these dots, reducing these frictions, raising the awareness. So I think that's really important to flag. And that Vermont as a state, as a legislature, as a tax base, has really stepped up and said, this type of investment and this type of coordination is really important. And for me, when I think about why is it important, why it matters, a few things come up. So one of them is that institutional markets are really great places for producers and ag, food, forestry businesses to look to scale their operations. So lots of farms, lots of producers, get to a point where selling directly to customers and doing smaller scale outlets has been great for them, but they want to grow, they want to get bigger. And institutional markets are wonderful places for that because the market, the institutional market sector is diverse in itself, but there's lots of overlap as well. So for a producer who may want to connect with, a healthcare provider in their community or an early care provider in their community or what have you, they may find that in preparing for that or kind of going through the motions to scale up also prepares them to maybe access other institutional markets. And so it can be a place to really grow a business and grow in a graduated way as well. So work through different markets and then get to a point where that business wants to be. I think institutions also are anchors in our communities, right? So they're places of intention, they're places that people come in and out of in really kind of sometimes random, but very equitable ways, kind of depending on what that institution is. So public school is a great example of that, right? We have kids from all different races and classes and backgrounds that are all coming into the same place. And those institutions become places where we get to express in a very direct way our values and the values of that community and the values of that institution. And so really, I think speaks to a piece around equity. If you have a food service that in a public school that is really prioritizing a kind of a values-based food system, you have kids from all throughout that community that are exposed to that on a daily basis. And I think that's true in the healthcare sector. It's true in the early care sector as well. I think corrections is unique, but there's overlap there as well. And so I think it's important to think about as we work towards a food system that is better in all the ways that we want it to be, that we recognize that institutions are uniquely positioned to express those values and then act upon them, right? So a lot of institutions have an opportunity to put down in writing, to work with their community to say, what is the food system that we want? What are our values that we bring into our purchasing and engage in those different things? So I think those are, some of the biggest reasons that institutional markets are important. And they're also a slice of the big procurement pie, right? So there's a lot of money that's being spent at our institutions on local food and non-local food. And so I think it's really important to look at the ways that we can incorporate more of that economic activity and support it through our institutional buyers. Because again, all those things have kind of reciprocal benefit as well. So if the hospitals form great relationships with a local beef producer, that beef producer may find themselves with more opportunities to sell to other institutions or other buyers as well. So they express values, they're important economic drivers in our community. And I think they do really speak to kind of this equity piece, right? Everybody, hopefully not that often, but typically goes to a hospital and has exposure to that. Public schools, those types of places where people are coming together and representing really kind of equal and diverse demographics of our communities. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Helen Rortvedt from Norfolk, Vermont.
Thanks, Trevor. Hi, everyone. My name's Helen Rortvedt, and like Trevor mentioned, I'm the Farm to School and Food Access Programs Director at Norfolk Vermont. And together with our partners at Shelburne Farms, we run the Vermont Feed Program, which is a statewide farm to school project. And Vermont Feed has a framework for farm to school where we aim to connect what we call the 3 C's: the classroom, the cafeteria, and the community. And recognizing that it really is the intersection of those 3 areas that is going to really help us build thriving communities and healthy kids, and a viable agricultural sector as well. And also, like Trevor mentioned, we really believe that farm to school in particular is a really powerful tool to advance equity for our kids and our families here in Vermont. And just to share a little bit about the scale and the scope of what's going on here in Vermont, we've had a strong farm to school program running for a really long time. The state invested in a farm to school grants program dating all the way back to 2007, but there was lots of efforts happening and that even predated that. And our most recent study, deep dive study that was conducted in 2018, identified that almost 90% of Vermont schools are already doing some form of local purchasing. Now that really ran the gamut from schools that are purchasing here and there just for special events to schools that are really making a commitment and purchasing significant portions of their food budgets and dedicating those to local producers. So we have a broad spectrum of ways that schools and school districts are interacting with this. And there is a long way to go now still. But it is really exciting to see that there is widespread acceptance that purchasing local food for schools, for kids is a good thing, and it is deeply valued here in Vermont in our public schools. And another thing that's really important to remember about the K-12 sector, while they may not have the biggest coffers and can pay the highest prices for their products, there are additional values that are being generated by local producers doing business with schools. Well, first and foremost, schools pay their bills and they pay them on time generally. So that's always good for the short term. But really what we're doing is we're investing in tomorrow's grocery shoppers. So kids that are showing up to school every day in Vermont through their elementary, middle, and high school careers, and they're being exposed to local food on their salad bars or in their breakfast program or after school snack program, are going to develop these lifelong healthy habits and these preferences for local foods. And we know this to be true because farm to school has been happening for so long here in Vermont that we have an entire generation of kids who have grown up in schools where they were served fresh local food, and they're now in college or have graduated. And when they show up at their universities and their colleges, they are requesting and they are demanding local food there. So that's kind of a neat just demonstration of this, long-term vision of what we're really trying to accomplish. So with all that said, all that really rosy picture, this is certainly not without its challenges. COVID has been really, really difficult for the K-12 sector, as everyone I'm sure is very aware. And the school nutrition programs in particular really borne a very significant brunt of responsibility and stress they're dealing with. Labor shortages, supply chain disruptions, everything that you're hearing about is really, really acute and felt very, it's just felt in the K-12 sector right now. But some of the silver linings have been the USDA passed waivers to allow effectively for us to offer universal free school meals. So for the first time in the history of the National School Lunch Program, all schools get to serve meals to all students, no questions asked, regardless of family income. And it has been a transformative experience for so many schools. We've seen increased participation, we've seen increased quality of meals as time has, as folks have resettled into how to even do meal service in COVID conditions. But it's been a really great equalizing force, and it has really helped to shine a light on the importance of school nutrition programs. And also at the same time, we just passed, or the state legislature passed last session, a bill that is going to incentivize schools to purchase more local foods. So we now have this very real financial opportunity for schools to make a more significant investment in local products and local food. So we'll be rolling that project or that program out over the course of the coming school year. And we're really excited to see the results and to see the potential and to see this program grow. So I will stop there. I could go on for days, but I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Cynthia Green, and she'll share about what's going on in the early childhood sector.
Thanks, Helen. Sorry, little fun note there. Thanks, Helen, appreciate it. And good morning, everybody. Again, I'm Cynthia Green. I work with Shelburne Farms, and I am part of the Vermont feed team as well. And I am focused on farm to early childhood. My background is early childhood. I've been an educator and a director, and I have run food programs through the child adult care food program. And I just see such amazing opportunity actually to think about nutritional services for very young children, think about how those services might impact their food choices in the future. And of course, in early childhood, we have very close bonds and connections and access to parents and families. And so our market goes beyond just the children and the people that we serve daily in our programs. It also reaches into families, and children absolutely can shape family behavior. There's no doubt about it. Anyone who's had a toddler at a table who doesn't like what they're eating probably knows what I'm talking about a little bit. So happy to be here and talk to you a little bit about this today. In farm to early childhood, I think nationally has been probably a slow growing movement for the past probably decade, maybe a little bit longer. Most notably with the National Farm to School Network. They've done a lot of work. They've done nationally and some surveying of what's going on in states. And that has led more recently, there have been some state leaders like North Carolina, Iowa, and Michigan who are sort of out ahead of other states, I think nationally in farm to early childhood, thinking about very similar concepts that Helen and Trevor have talked about. So values-based local purchasing, how do we bolster food and nutrition insecurity within our population? How do we look at how local purchasing fits into nutritional services for young children? And all of that led to, interestingly enough, in early childhood, the Centers for Disease Control actually is the entity, our health sector picked up farm to early childhood and has adopted it actually as an evidence-informed child obesity prevention model. And what that really means for us sort of thinking about this is this mixed delivery model with mixed federal funding streams that can support farm to early childhood and therefore potential access to revenues that can help early childhood sector access local food and local markets. And so I think it's in Vermont, what this means in Vermont, we are a little behind the farm to school movement in Vermont. The Razo-McLaughlin Act was updated in 2017. So that meant in 2018, that gave the early childhood sector for the first time in Vermont access to some of these professional development and grants programs. We've done a lot of work, partnerships on the ground. And again, this is multi-sector. So our health department has been part of this. Our NOFA, Vermont Feed, has been part of this, the Agency of Agriculture, the Child Development Division. And what this means is there's now pretty much a farm to early childhood movement that is culminated in Vermont. And it's definitely increasing demand, definitely awareness, and definitely demand for food and farm education programming, for professional development for adults working with young children, and access to local food in early childhood programs. So that's incredibly exciting, I think. The other area that I think is interesting to think about with farm to early childhood is systemically our state agencies and administrative bodies for the early childhood system are also very interested in food and nutrition security and looking at how to address that locally. So thinking about farm to institution and access to local agricultural products, that absolutely fits in. And our state agencies are looking to tie farm to early childhood opportunities and programming into state level systems like our child care licensing regulations, like it's called STARS or Step Ahead Recognition System, which is a quality rating program for early childhood programs. So again, systemically, what this means is there's the potential for funding to support access to local foods. And then I think, to sort of frame quickly a little bit of context in terms of scale, so folks kind of understand what we're talking about when we talk about early childhood. Pre-COVID numbers, COVID definitely has thrown a monkey wrench into many numbers these days, but pre-COVID, approximately 21,000 children under the age of 5 were in out-of-home care during the week. And if we think about that sort of a grade equivalent, that's like every first, second, and third grader in Vermont and half of the fourth grade of all children in Vermont in those grades. And so this number isn't an insignificant number of small people to feed. They're housed in programs that have staff. Like I said, we have access to families. And so I believe this is an untapped market that aligns with some of the strategic plan initiatives and priorities in the Farm to Institution strategic plan that could be tapped in the future. So like many, I could go on, but I'm going to stop there as well. And I am going to hand it off to Annie Rowell.
Great, thanks, Cynthia. All right, hi everyone. So I'm Annie Rowell, and I am the Vermont First Coordinator for Sodexo. So mostly I'll be talking about campuses, but just for a bit of context, Sodexo is a food service company, and we operate the majority of campuses in Vermont that have a food service program. But we also operate dining at 2 hospitals, Mount Ascutney Hospital and Brattleboro Retreat, as well as a few kind of corporate accounts like National Life or Dealer.com. But our primary work in Vermont is focused on campuses. So I won't be speaking for all campuses in Vermont, but we do, again, represent a majority. So campuses are typically where we see a lot of really high demand for local food. And that's kind of a shared reasoning between the fact that there's a kind of flexibility and options between residential dining and a variety of retail outlets. But also in the way that admissions uses a quality food program to leverage the campus as a differentiator. So we do see kind of that as a big leverage point, and again, kind of building off the farm to school movement of students coming to college, really looking for some higher value products and being more vocal about demanding those items. In general, just a little bit about the campus sector. So we have been seeing some declining enrollment and some campus closures, even pre-COVID. So folks probably are familiar with that, and in Vermont with some surprising closures as well. So definitely kind of a bit of a challenging environment, again, even pre-COVID. Some pre-COVID stats. In general, so meals served per day, we're roughly serving over 28,000 meals per day. This year we even at UVM, we did see the largest incoming class in the campus history. So we are seeing some of those numbers coming back. But so I do anticipate we will be back to some range of these numbers. And our fiscal year 19 local purchases per year are at $2.8 million. And that's using the Vermont local definition that Farm to Plate aligns with. As a note, that did change last year, and we changed with that alignment too. But also this definition is also one of the smallest definitions out there, particularly in New England. So we're pretty proud of the local spend that we're able to do and focus on and continue to grow. And then again, pre-COVID, we employ roughly, over 1,500 people in Vermont. So some trends over the past 10 years, I think kind of due to Farm to Plate, we can attribute the start of Vermont First. There's a direct connection there. So I think when Farm to Plate started and put out that kind of call to action to Farm to Institution, it kind of created that opportunity for Sodexo to come to the table to look for kind of how to be more involved and how local could also be a differentiator as well. So Vermont First was the first program of its kind in Sodexo and as I've understood it, kind of in food service management companies to leverage a statewide purchasing towards a common goal, and kind of bringing all the accounts in one state under one umbrella, and looking to leverage it towards strategic purchasing of local products. So some of the successes that we've had, first, I think just that alignment of values and local definition across multiple campuses. When I started in 2015, creating those shared metrics, values and language across campuses, and focusing on areas where we could increase purchasing of specific products that can be grown or produced well in Vermont, and to use that the data that we work so hard to put together, and the network within Farm to Plate to identify and pursue opportunities. So like one example is we started a local ground beef program in partnership with Black River Meats, I believe 4 years ago, and we were able to increase our local ground beef purchasing from 8% to now over 50% local. Relationships have been a really key feature of this. I think we know that just the end of the bandwidth and focus of growing purchasing is really hinges on the quality of relationships, and having people who have the capacity to kind of do that continued work. And so I think that has definitely been that is no exception in the campus sector. We also have had a lot of, I think just in general, other successes include strategic sourcing processes. So working on building our our strategy for how we make commitments, how we set up standing orders to make it easier for producers to know what we'll be purchasing, and for chefs to kind of release some of the burden on chefs who are really time strapped and busy, to not have to remember to place that extra order, but to make sure that that transaction will happen. Working to tying our menus to seasonality through programs like Harvest of the Month. And sort of being in a position to be able to pursue some opportunities like the New England Food Vision Prize that can kind of go to supporting the producers we're working with. Also in a position for that food system education, kind of use our access to students to educate about the local food system values and prepare to be more informed consumers. We put on a student symposium a couple of years ago, all about food system and kind of farm to institution education, but also connecting to food system careers, and educational materials and dining halls and things like class partnerships. We also have a fellowship program with the UVM Food Systems graduate program of kind of accessing the amazing quality students who go through that program to also focus on farm to institution work. And we're also seeing the growth of this model in other states like Maine, Mass, California, Florida, and West Virginia. So I believe I'm kind of getting to my time here, but just a couple notes on enduring barriers that we're facing. Just in general, the cost of education and kind of maximizing what can be offered within a traditional meal plan, kind of knowing that residential dining is, when we think about kind of that access and equity, is kind of where that really happens on campus and sort of less so in retail. Our purchasing system is, I think you don't want to kind of do smoke and mirrors, but it isn't super straightforward, and it is complex. So that relationship takes time to build. And then once the spigot is on, it's on. So I think kind of working, that's sort of what my role is focused on, is managing kind of that growth and trying to kind of make it as easy of a process as it can be, and fill in those communication gaps. Just competing demands on campus. I think in addition to local, we're definitely, dining is kind of where there's a lot of kind of the confluence of a lot of different demands, things like allergens, health and wellness, demands for more options or maybe less options, so we could really focus on one type of purchasing like local. Plant-based is huge. Also comfort foods. The chicken nuggets is always the example we come back to of that kind of high demand, and food security. We've also seen some closures of some key local businesses. That was incredibly sad over the past couple of years, and again, really continuing to focus on and address food insecurity on campus with programs like Swipe Out Hunger. So that's kind of the quick rundown of some of the things we're seeing in the campus sector. And I'll pass it on to Leah now to hear a little bit more about UVM Med Center and what's happening in healthcare.
Hello, everybody. I'm Leah Pryor. I'm the Executive Chef Manager here at the University of Vermont Medical Center. It's great to come after Annie with all the great work that's happening over at Sodexo and their food system. As you know, the university here has really pushed sustainability and our, many programs that we've been pushing for many years and have really been in the forefront of a lot of this work with Farm to Institution. And I'm super proud to be a part of that. I think I just want to mention a few things that were kind of, some stories that kind of bring this together. And, from the 10 years that we've been doing it for 20 years, but the 10 years that we're in the question. I think when I think about chefs and when I think about our food system, I always think there's this bit of a disconnect. We have all of this incredible produce and all of this great stuff that we have around, but a lot of the times we don't have the education that we need to give to our chefs, especially in food service. So I've been very fortunate to be able to build the Culinary Medicine program here at the hospital, where I've been able to create chef educators that has been able to kind of even that out to really start to get to where the road, where the rubber meets the road, to teach our food service how to use local product and how to put it into our systems. And for us being at a hospital, we have a whole kind of aspect of patient safety that we have to be very, very well aware of and mindful. So when I think about the work that we do in Farm to Institution, I think one story that comes to mind is our connection with bean crafters. So probably around 5 years ago, we were very fortunate to meet up with Joe Boston of Bean Crafters and actually create something that was specifically made for us. Meaning that we were able to give them our specs. They were able to create a bean puree that we use in all of our quesadillas that we serve on the patient line. That is an exact example of the operations that needs to happen to create or to take local food and then to put it onto a patient line. There's a lot of things that have to happen to check the boxes off to ensure that safety. And because of that, we've been able to create an incredibly delicious bean puree that goes on the quesadillas that then we get to serve our patients. So those are the kind of things that we're working on. COVID, of course, bringing up COVID, has really kind of slowed some of this process down, but we really focus on finding more of those connections so that we can continue to be a pillar in that work when it comes to Farm to Institution. Some something else, it's funny when Trevor said buying beef. We buy from Lucas Family Farms, all of our beef at the moment for our patient line, which is really key. And to find those relationships and to really be able to work with them specifically to get the things that we need. The other thing, talking about culinary medicine, I think is another really great thing that we are offering here at the hospital, because something that I think most of us, or not most of us, but on this call, most are very connected to food. But when we are working with our patients, the community, and participants in culinary medicine, we're really able to bridge the gap of where people feel uncomfortable even to get into their kitchens. So being able to use this tool of teaching people how to connect to their food has been incredible. We see it a lot in our, we see it in our pain clinic, the comprehensive pain clinic, which is to have a pillar of nutrition there so that we're able to connect people back to their kitchens. So those are the two things, the culinary medicine program, as well as our farm to institution with, using the story of the bean crafters, where I really think we're going to continue to push this work forward here at the hospital. And I'm now going to pass it over to my wonderful co-manager, Tenley Burlingame.
Thank you, Leah. So as Leah said, my name is Tenley Burlingame. I'm the patient food service manager at UVM Medical Center. So I work hand in hand with Leah, which I'm very lucky to do so. And I also sit on the Healthy Food and Healthcare Work Group for our state, as does Leah and Helen, who's also on this panel. And so I've been asked to kind of speak from that perspective. So I will do my best to speak from that perspective, but also shed a little light for UVM Medical Center at the same time. In terms of the last 10 years and moving into now, which inherently has been driven by COVID. Across our work group for the state, which includes long-term care facilities, healthcare facilities, the overwhelming communication we've had, and granted our communication has been down a bit due to the workload that we all are facing, but the overwhelming communications we've been having have been around supply chain issues and staffing issues. So the two themes that we're kind of all experiencing right now. I think there are some organizations and institutions that saw a hit in their volumes. For us, we saw an unprecedented surge in our volumes during COVID. So relying on our local farmers, as Leah's team so beautifully does, has really saved us in a lot of ways when we have had such tremendous supply chain issues, from, paper goods to any produce to any staple on our menu. And for us, changing menu items when a new replacement comes in, as we refer to it, that's hours of work, because we are calculating nutrients, allergens, and all of the different diet orders that patients can be on. So when this happens, sometimes with 3, 4, 5 items a day that may impact 25 menu items, it's a lot of work for us. And it has definitely driven us to be more agile and to rely locally as we're able to. I think a little perspective specifically for UVM Medical Center, we operate in a kitchen that was built to kind of max out at 750 patient meals a day. And since the beginning of COVID, we've been averaging around 900 to 1,000 meals a day. So we are beyond our capacity. So we are having to be really creative in what we bring in and relying on those local partners to be reliable for us so that we can continue to feed our patients with the quality that we have held ourselves to over the past 10 years. And I'll hand it over to Peter.
Thanks, Tenley, and thanks everyone. That was a great overview in really fast form of some amazing things that are happening across the state, across these sectors. Our last speaker on this first question is Brian Matowski, who's with the Chittenden Women's Correctional Facility. Brian's the food service supervisor. He's not with us today. I spoke to him earlier this week because he's in the middle of preparing for the Thanksgiving meal, which is the biggest meal of the year that they serve at the correctional facilities. So with a little luck with Zoom, I will share my screen and let Brian introduce himself. Okay, we're gonna try that one more time. Okay, yeah. Hey, Brian, how you doing today?
Good, Peter. How are you?
Doing all right. Brian, will you just introduce yourself for folks in the audience and tell us a little bit about the food operation and Department of Corrections?
My name is Brian Matowski. I'm the food service supervisor at the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility in South Burlington, one of 6 facilities in the state. Altogether, we've got about 1,200 inmates that we feed in the 6 facilities.
Tell us a little bit about how you source food and Hey, Brian, how you doing today?
Good, Peter. How are you? Doing local purchasing from farmers since 1992. Not just with Department of Corrections. Making contacts with farmers is key in being able to communicate back and forth. Things have gotten easier over the years with the farm to school program, setting up distribution. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. So you've been able to take advantage of some of the products that comes on the school distribution route. I know in some states it's really hard for corrections to buy from a local farmer because of rules, but in Vermont there's an exemption with the blanket delegation of authority that lets you do that. Is that right?
That's true. The legislature passed an Act 38 bill several years back that created the blanket delegation of authority, and it lets the food service supervisors just go straight to the farmer and purchase. The farmer needs to do a W-9, which is a federal form, and get set up as a purveyor for the state. But once that's set up, things go smoothly.
What are some of the products you've been most able to get from Vermont producers?
I'd say cheese is certainly right up there in terms of volume. Produce from local farmers. One year we closed out an orchard's cold storage, bought about 6 pallets of apples. The inmates could have any fruit they wanted for the next few weeks, so long as it was apples.
Sort of like any color your car you want, as long as it's black with the force.
That's right.
What about dairy? I know some of the facilities are able to get liquid milk, but others use powdered milk. Is that right?
We've got a huge problem with refrigerated storage space. The kitchens weren't built, most of the kitchens weren't built with the volume of inmates that we're doing now. So the kitchen storage capacity is way too small to really keep enough milk on hand. A few of us are doing liquid milk, and Department of Ag has actually bought a refrigerator for us at Chittenden.
Oh, that's great. When you think about some of the biggest challenges that you face with buying local food, what are the ones that come up? You've mentioned freezer storage is one for sure.
Freezer storage for processing the produce that we get from the farms is a huge complexity. Getting the farmers not to pack in wooden crates, keeping things prison safe. getting farmers to understand that when they come to a facility, sometimes it may take a while to get into the truck trap that is there for an inspection. A couple of the facilities have outside the perimeter loading docks, which makes it much easier for a few of them.
Got it. How about production of food at the facilities, either in gardens or in other spaces? I know there's a lot of constraints, but are there some cases where that's happening?
The prison garden system has been increasing. We're about 20% of the produce that we're buying local is actually produced within the perimeter of the facilities. So the gardening component of inmates working and tilling the soil has actually increased.
Oh, that's great. When you think about the future, what are some things that you hope will happen? I know you have a new commissioner that's just come in a couple of weeks ago, but in terms of the food operation overall, do you have a sense of some things that, if you had your wish list, that you'd really like to see change?
If I had my wish list, we'd get a whole lot more freezer capacity so that we could keep on buying produce and processing it. We've got plenty of inmate labor that is looking to handle and process the food that we get from the farms. We don't need the farmers market produce. We need the culinary grade produce, the produce with a blemish on it. Maybe it's too small, maybe it's too big, but the produce that the farmers are very likely to till back underneath the soil and lose his seed money on, we'd just as soon pay for that at a discount and help the farmer out to break even and help the taxpayer dollar out to stretch it a little bit further.
That's great. Really see how the Department of Corrections food operation fits into the broader farm to institution supply chain, and how some of the, you have some opportunities, certainly some challenges, but hopefully working together, all the institutions can help be a really viable part of the market for Vermont producers. Thanks. I know you got a busy schedule, Brian. Really appreciate your time today.
We look forward to any connections we can make with the farmers, and have a good day.
Hi, all. Hope that worked okay for you, and apologize for some of the technical challenges there. I really appreciate the comments earlier. I mean, thinking about the values and leadership and education for our population in Vermont through farm to institution efforts. I know across the region, we've calculated about a quarter of the people in New England spend some significant amount of time at institutions on a regular basis. So the reach is actually quite wide. And also the important issues raised in terms of equity and access for all Vermonters, the importance of relationships and partnerships, and yet the complexity of the sourcing with the competing demands, challenges in the supply chain these days, food safety issues, but some of the opportunities with chef education and building those creative supply chain strategies are some of the things that we're hearing have had a real big impact. What we're going to do now is turn our attention to the future. And I'd like each of the panelists to talk a little bit about some of the trends they see looking forward, challenges we're likely to come across, but also the opportunities and what gives you hope. So going to start us off in sort of reverse order here and ask Leah and Tenley to give us your thoughts as you look ahead.
I'll go first, Leah. Okay, so I would say for looking ahead, I don't anticipate our staffing challenges are going to change or lighten up in the near future. So I think on our end, it's a lot of creativity in terms of retaining employees and incentivizing the work here. And so Leah and I are working really hard on that every day, I would say. In terms of looking forward, what I look forward to on our wish list, I would say a few things. We've certainly seen our patient population evolve here. So we've shifted away from, we're shifting away from a lot of food choices and menu options that are based on restrictions, so nutrient restrictions, and headed towards tackling the malnutrition that we're seeing in an overwhelming percentage of our patients that come in. So when we're looking at new menu items or new recipes, we're really focused on kind of maximizing that nutrient potential within foods rather than seeking out foods that can help us meet some of the restrictions that we used to be really wedded to. I think one thing Leah and I have been working on for over a year now and are super hopeful to push forward in the next year is a totally new patient menu that kind of better reflects the community we serve, better reflects their health needs in terms of maximizing that nutrient potential and just diversifying our options so that any patient can come from our community and see a food or hopefully multiple foods that are familiar to them so that they will be more inclined to eat here and to nourish themselves. And I'll hand it to Leah for her side.
That was beautifully put. Thank you, Tenley. I think when we talk about the patient menu, the bright side of the new patient menu is actually all of the new relationships that we're going to be able to bring to the farmers to really, I think the thing that we want to start with is that we want to go to them and ask them what they are doing well. So then I can take that information and then incorporate that into the patient menu. I think that is something that we forget, especially in the cooking world, is that, you know, as chefs, we think we have all these great ideas and we go to the farmer, we say, this is what I'm looking for, but maybe it's just not being, it's not growing well and it's going to, have too much, whatever thing that comes about, it might not fit. So I really want to kind of work on going to the farmer and really saying, hey, what do you have for me? Because then I'm going to now highlight that on our patient menu. I think that's a really exciting, hopeful task that is ahead of us. When I think about our challenges, I have to, basically say what Tenley is saying. Staffing and our supply chain is hurting, and that makes things very difficult on a day-to-day basis. I really have to thank my buyer, Scott Young, who is just somebody who is kind of like an unsung hero, because every day he works with all of our purveyors and he gets lists of things that we don't have, and he needs to find safe and good replacements in real time. And he's been doing this now for 2 years, and it's a lot. So that's hard. That's a hard thing for us to face. But silver lining to this is that we're becoming more and more agile. And when we're in such a large organization like the hospital here, quite the pillar in our community, when we become a little faster, it's quite amazing how creative we can become and more solution-based and welcome to new ideas. So it's been quite a ride. And yeah, I'm now going to pass it to, who are we going next to? To Annie, because we're going in reverse. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Leah. So much of what Leah and Tenley said, I reiterate. I'm just speaking specifically about trends we see for campuses. Plant-based, definitely a huge area of focus. We've added a ton of plant-forward recipes to our menus and continue to see that as really one of the top demands among students. And sort of hand in hand with that is less meat, better meat, and thinking about how we can reduce portion sizes and what that savings can do towards buying higher price and higher value meat. Things like, in addition to Real Food Challenge, which is actually in a bit of a holding pattern with kind of coming out with the new standards, and I think sometime in the next year or two, that's been a big part of campus kind of priorities were since up to 2020, and now we're kind of waiting to see what happens there, but also things like the Cool Food Pledge and looking at making more links between dining menus and climate change. So plant-based is kind of part of that type of a pledge. So those are kind of some sourcing strategies out there, and kind of local fits into a lot of aspects of those, but trying to kind of tie those together in one kind of sourcing strategy continues to be difficult, and sort of that messaging out to consumers, is taken a lot of work, and I anticipate that will continue to be the story there. Supplier diversity is a big area of focus, and we're working on kind of understanding more about the diverse suppliers in our local network and identifying opportunities for growth there. Just in general, kind of just more to-go options and mobile ordering, kind of that flexibility on campus is definitely becoming more and more of a key, and also sort of that less contact type of service in COVID. Just to reiterate Leah and Tenley's point of disrupted supply chain, but what we're seeing as potential opening for local and regional sourcing, and sort of that helps make that case for the need for regional resiliency. Key challenges being labor and supply chain disruption, but also just in general, some of our supply chain requirements. We have done some work around things like in the dairy sector and some of the food safety requirements and ways to use the state audit in place of a third-party audit for dairy processors. So we have done some work to try to kind of align that and remove some of those costs and barriers. In terms of opportunities, continue to see, I've been, and I think so many different businesses and organizations and individuals sort of seeing this time as opportunity for kind of a reboot, and sort of coming at it with a fresh slate of, kind of pulling ourselves out of COVID, and looking ahead. So I think kind of looking at the past 5 years, looking at our numbers and what we've learned, and using that to kind of organize towards the momentum of the new farm to plate goal of 25% by 2030. Looking at that as sort of a point of alignment, and able to coordinate with other organizations, other institutional markets, other producers to strategize in growth areas for production, and the role that institutional markets can play in driving some of that growth. We have an external body of kind of governance called our advisory board that's made up of members of the food system community in Vermont, and just how important that group is in being coordinated, again, with that driving that production growth. And also to Leah's point of, I think, continuing, we think of chefs as being, able to be really agile and flexible, but also just in the past couple of years, what that additional learning. And so I think continuing to kind of use what we've learned with that agility, and kind of take that into the next couple of years here. Some wishes for moving ahead, need to kind of continue that research to connect the local and environmental impact, things like we know about, organic production, but also talking about that, reduced food miles, but kind of putting more research to that as we do see that kind of continued demand at campuses for things like Cool Food Pledge. Continue to need top-down engagement and support. I think we've had a lot of success in sort of the adaptive type networks, but need to kind of continue to advocate and bring in champions within the hierarchical networks. Continue to make connection between local food procurement and food system work, and employee retention and job satisfaction. Kind of this, and I think that will continue to be a real driver of kind of that working towards a higher cause. And also just learning between the different institutional sectors. I think just preparing for this session and being on this call and working with these other institutional sector leads about what we can learn from each other and strategize on. So things like the farm to school incentive and, you know, how that could apply to other sectors. So just some of my thoughts there. So I am passing it on to Cynthia.
Thanks, Annie. So the future of farm to early childhood, I think a couple of things, probably the flip side of a coin, really. It's both a challenge and some amazing opportunities. Nationally, there's an amazing spotlight on early childhood services right now, and both through acts like ARPA funding and the Build Back Better Act, which we know isn't solidified, early childhood services and the systems that support those services are targeted for massive investment. And we know in Vermont, nationally too, that childcare is needed in order to support other sectors and other workforces. So while all of the same COVID impacts around workforce and supply and demand and supply chains for food markets impact early childhood, it's an unformed system, and your voice can help shape what that looks like, especially as these investments from the federal level come into states in the near future. So to me, that's incredibly exciting. This sort of challenge of not having a formed system for nutritional services for early childhood settings, and yet the opportunity to have voices shape what that looks like. And I think local voice and local community is incredibly important within early childhood settings. Anyway, it's an intrinsic component of how we deliver services, those community connections. And so thinking about where our food comes from, how our children learn about food, how they get to know their local producers, farmers, and who drives the food around and who prepares that food are all incredibly important aspects of the system that we intend to build for the nutritional services in early childhood in the near future. So I think there's great opportunity, and some of the creative ways that Vermont has currently more recently been trying to address local food. The Agency of Agriculture offered community supported agriculture grants to early childhood settings so that they could purchase CSAs. And again, so sort of thinking about right sizing, market size to whatever the development stage is of the producer or farmer. There's opportunity to look at scale and right sizing markets. We don't have right now a lot of procurement or purchasing bureaucracy or red tape because it is an unformed market. So we have the opportunity to form it and streamline it from the get-go, which I also think your voices could help shape what happens and how to make this accessible, both for early childhood providers to ease the administrative burden, but also for producers to get their foods out to this potential market. And then the last thing I will say, again, I'll refer to sort of that systems level piece in Vermont. Just in January of this year, 2021, we did form a Farm to Early Childhood Coalition, and that is a group of cross-sector folks who have come together to really think about what farm to early childhood can look like. How do we equitably scale farm to early childhood across the state? And how do we highlight local as a primary component of that system? So again, thinking about where farm to early childhood intersects with the strategic plan, Farm to Plate and Vermont Agriculture strategic plan, I think there's great opportunity in framing the future of farm to early childhood in Vermont. And I am going to pass it on to Helen.
Thanks, Cynthia. It's been so great to hear all of your reflections and thinking about what's coming down the pike in all of these various institutional sectors. And I think, you know, a lot is relevant in the K-12 sector as well. I think probably one of the biggest opportunities we have is to make permanent the universal meals that we've been experiencing for the last 2 school years. And I think it's going to be nearly impossible to go back to our old system where we categorize kids by who gets a free or reduced price meal or which kids have to pay based on family income and complicated forms. And I just don't think families and communities are going to accept that moving forward. So luckily, we have an opportunity this upcoming legislative session to pass a bill that will make permanent universal meals here in Vermont. And while that is, a specific, piece of the puzzle, it is so totally related to our ability to grow farm to school and increase local purchasing, because if we make permanent universal meals, we now have an opportunity to change our whole school culture for the long run, and to stop dividing kids by class in the cafeteria, and to stop having dual systems where some kids bring their lunch and some kids eat at school, to just really embrace that this is something we all do together. We all have the same textbooks, we all sit at the same desks and use the same basketballs in gym class. We should share meals together. And also universal meals will, it's been proven to increase participation, and the more kids that eat every day, the more federal reimbursement funds come into our state and into our school programs. And we know that so many of our school districts are interested and committed to increasing their local purchasing as their budgets allow. So, and we also know that one of the persistent barriers to increasing local purchasing beyond the low-hanging fruit, pun intended, because there's a lot of local apples that are purchased by schools in Vermont, which is great, but let's move beyond that. And we've known for years that what schools need in order to move beyond that is just more financial resources to do so. And so a combination of making permanent universal meals, increasing participation, and therefore federal reimbursements coming into those programs, in addition to this new local purchasing incentive that's being invested in by the state, we're finally giving schools an opportunity to do what they've been saying for years they want to do. And so I just really think we're at a moment, we're kind of peering over the precipice of hopefully a real watershed moment, a real moment of change, positive change that we've been seeking for a long time and laying the groundwork for a long time. So I'm very hopeful about that. And if and when we tackle those twin sort of issues and opportunities, I really like to see us and the K-12 sector in farm to school committing to deepening our work around values-based purchasing that so many of you have spoken to in a variety of ways. And the K-12 sector very much has done so much in identifying its values and making purchasing decisions informed by those values. And I think there's even more that we can do once we are freed from some of the very significant barriers of just needing to purchase enough food to make a meal. Can we get to a place where the people who are making purchasing decisions really do get to exhibit those values and think about not only cost and local, which is usually a proxy that folks use to describe a whole lot of other values. And how can we allow them to have the purchasing power and the decision-making power to invest in and purchase foods that are, produced in sustainable fashions and where we are considering labor standards and production methods. Can we have schools really feel confident that they can purchase organic foods and regenerative foods and sustainably produced and harvested foods? Can we think about and can we have a conversation about what products are more climate friendly than others? Wouldn't that be amazing if schools really had the flexibility and the ability to make those decisions? I really think here in Vermont, we would be leaders on the national scene yet again if we really were able to make those investments and free the decision makers from just the burden of always having to defer to cost before other things. So that's what I am excited about. I know I often have, the optimist perspective here, but I do really believe that we're at a moment where things may hopefully change moving forward. And let's take the spotlight that schools have and school meal programs in particular have enjoyed during COVID, and let's carry that forward into whatever comes after. So that's where I'll end. And I'm going to pass it off to Trevor.
Ellen, thanks everybody else. I think that's great reflections on some of the really honest challenges that the different sectors face, and lots of reasons to be optimistic too, which I am as well. When I think one of the big picture things for me is that making farm to institution work, the primary challenge has typically been this kind of price point. Like, how do we afford food that's produced in a different way than the kind of global industrial food system has done that? I started my career in college university dining, and it was always about the kind of economic impact of local purchasing. So we were tracking how much we're buying and reporting out to all the constituents, oh, it's this many thousands of dollars every year. And that was always the so what of it. And I think what's exciting for me is there's been more and more awareness around kind of capturing the externalities of the larger food system and the benefits of buying from local producers. So, the reason so much of the food produced here in Vermont is done so in a sustainable way from an environmental standpoint and a socially just way. And the broader food system, the commodity food system, often doesn't reflect the cost of producing products in ways that maybe aren't as environmentally friendly or socially just. And so being able to kind of capture some of these things in different metrics beyond just what the economic impact of local procurement is, but what is the kind of social cultural impact of that? What is the impact on our local economies? What's the impact of a child going to an early childhood center and having an opportunity to eat food from the farmer down the road and make that personal connection with somebody in that community? So I think just the kind of expansion of these considerations and what Annie was talking about with like the cool food pledge, what has been happening through the Good Purchasing Institute and others, and in Peter's shop at Fine, to really look at like, what is the big picture so what of this impact? Not just how is it driving economic activity, but how is it making our communities stronger? How is it making our landscapes more resilient? Those are the types of things that I get really excited about when I see the kind of the state and the national conversation really start to focus on those things even more. And I think that the extent that we can do that is great, with the caveat that I think we also have to recognize that when you measure something, there's always kind of a pitfall of it being somewhat reductive, right? So it's really often easier to look at something like economic impact versus, again, that child who's making a connection with a farmer. So as we measure these things, as we kind of build the whole kind of dashboard of like, why is this important and what are the impacts of doing this? Just keeping in mind that those impacts may not be measurable. They may be more qualitative. They may be more in those kind of human to human connections, human to land connections that often aren't things that you can put on a dashboard or really kind of express in a very succinct data point. So, beyond that, I think there's lots of opportunities, even just this panel, discussions that we had and kind of preparing for this. I think we all realized like, wow, Brian talking about how farm to school built the relationships and the kind of scaffolding that he needed to do more local purchasing at the correctional institutions. Those are the types of things that I'm really excited to do more of and to help create more of these connections and learn from different sectors to keep building on this movement. So I appreciate everybody's work in this area, and we'll hand it back over to our fearless leader, Peter.
Thanks, Trevor, and pretty fearless, although very inspired. Thanks to all of you. And Trevor, I think that was a great sort of culminating wrap up perspective on this. We do have time for a few questions before we wrap up at the top of the hour. Helen Laban put one in the chat, and if others have questions, feel free to add them in. We'll get to as many as we can, and we can also get back to you by email later. Helen's question is one that I was thinking about as well, because many of you touched on this, which is, and she was putting this initially to Leah, but I think some of the others of you can comment on this as well, that to say a little bit more about the potential to build culinary skills and knowledge for individuals, sort of both working in the institutions, but those who are served by the institutions, to influence their eating patterns at home. And as Helen says, the potential to see a proactive bridge from what food we find in institutions to what is carried over into the home cooking and home purchasing. And I will also say that Brian mentioned this in a conversation I had with him, where he's doing a lot of work with the women in the facility in Chittenden to learn culinary skills to help both for their own home eating, but also for a job and employment opportunities when they return. And he's collaborating with some other folks in Maine and other places to think about how best to do that. But Leah, I'm gonna turn it back to you. You talked a little bit about the culinary medicine and culinary education. If you'd expand on that a little bit more, that'd be great.
Well, it's a great question. And it really is what sometimes stands in the way is when we have all this great local product and we're trying to use it and we're trying to incorporate it, whether it's in somebody's kitchen versus in an institution, we really need to give the tools to the people who are preparing that, as well as then being able to kind of make a to make the home version of that. And I'm going to use the example of frozen vegetables. I think this is a sticking point for many people. When we're dealing with local product, we, seasonality is key. But what we like to do in institution, especially for us in the hospital, is that we have a lot of partnerships with other farmers that will process and then freeze this product. And this is a great thing because when we think about seasonality, we're actually going to be able to pick that product at the height of seasonality, be able to to process it, then freeze it, and then use it at a later time. So this is great. But then we also have this other aspect of things where people think frozen is not necessarily great. So we have to kind of get people excited about how do we use frozen vegetables or frozen fruit. And that's where I think when Helen was asking that question is, how do we get people excited about these local products that actually might be better for us in the sense that they could be cheaper, they're easily accessible, they're stored in a freezer so they have longer shelf lives. Like, how do we actually get people excited about using that product? And I think that is where the education part comes in. I mean, we have lost our connection to the kitchen. It has happened over many, many years, even though in our institutions that we have food service and people are skilled and they're cooking well. But when we're looking at people in their homes, there's a lot that has been lost. So I think really, just as whatever platform we have, getting people to be able to deliver those skills, whether it's just a cooking class. I mean, in all of our programming that we do in culinary medicine, whether it's gardening for health or healthcare shares or the learning garden or skills before pills, all of those programmings have a culinary competencies put into that, and real actual knives on boards cutting things and having experiences and learning new language for people to connect back to their kitchens. There. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. And I actually would like to hear from Cynthia and Helen and Annie on this as well. I know that sort of professional development, I know Cynthia both in Vermont and hopefully across New England, you having a role there. And I know Helen with the Farm to School Institute, but a lot of other ways. And Annie, I know also. So love if you'd each take a minute or so and share from your perspective on that question too, that'd be great.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. Thanks, Peter. Early childhood is a great opportunity to begin building those skills, and we absolutely do. We cook with kids often in classrooms, in our kitchens. We're introducing, believe it or not, chopping, knife skills, food processing skills as early as age 2, maybe even 18 months. I've baked bread with babies as young as 8 months, as long as they can sit up. So we are absolutely working to introduce food culture, nutrition knowledge, even at very young ages. And again, because we have direct access to parents almost on a daily basis, we really are able to influence and bridge sort of a food culture and food use between our educational settings and the home setting. We in Vermont just recently in the past 2 years, we piloted actually what we're calling a Farm to Early Childhood course. It's for collegiate level credit for early childhood providers to learn about farm to early childhood, in an entire module, 5-week module, is all around the kitchen. And so while we are virtual because of COVID, we still practice some type of culinary skill sets. And how to use food with children safely. And we have different types of equipment, for instance, that are child friendly that folks can use. And the last sort of thing I'll just wrap up with when it comes to, I think, parents, and again, sort of bridging that early care and education service setting with the family setting, we really access additional community partners. So our maternal child health division, for instance, with Women, Infants, and Children program, or the supplemental nutrition assistance program, the education, so SNAP Ed, we actually partner with those types of programs for the nutrition and food education components, and we do complementary and collaborative programming for parents, for early childhood providers. And those type of programs absolutely incorporate culinary skills for parents and for early childhood providers who might be using local food. So we are, to use the pun, we're baking it into our system, we're baking it into the program, and we hope that this then sets the stage for kiddos when they reach school and some of the farm to school programming that Helen can talk about.
What a great segue. I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, I think this question that Helen Laban posed is in my mind best summed up by the reason for our 3 C's framework. Really everything that we're doing in the farm to school movement is seeking to connect the cafeteria, so all of the procurement decisions that are being made there, and ideally all of the local purchasing that's happening there, with the classroom and the opportunity to see the cafeteria as a classroom and a learning opportunity and a learning environment. We often like to say the cafeteria is the largest classroom in every school. And then of course with the community too. So farm to school is just, there's a million ways that it can look in any community, but there's so many great resources out there. If you're not familiar with the Vermont Harvest of the Month program, I highly recommend you check it out. But it's it's designed and geared towards the K-12 space, but is applicable, I think, in any institutional sector. It's just a campaign to promote the use of local seasonal foods that are local to Vermont. And there's a lot of really great lesson plans that can be used in a classroom setting. There's recipes that can be scaled for the cafeteria setting. And then there's also take-home activities and recipes to send home to parents, so that there is some of that point of connection to the family. And so, and I just would also mention that during COVID, especially during the very dark early days of COVID, the school cafeteria and the school nutrition programs were, for many families, the only point of connection to their school during those early closures. Schools figured out how to send meals home on the school bus, and families waited with their masks for the school bus to show up every day. And that was the point of hope. And we're going to get through this, and this point of connection that was just so needed during those really, really dark times. And schools got so creative. They not only sent home the reimbursable meals, but they figured out how to pack snack packs that featured the Vermont Harvest of the Month. They printed off, teachers coordinated, and they printed off flyers and activities and that parents could do at home with their kids. It was just this real opportunity to rally around farm to school in order to help these communities get through some of those really, really dark days. So just wanted to point that out. And then also, just recognizing that we do continue the hands-on culinary education throughout the K-12 experience. There's all kinds of opportunities with cooking carts in elementary schools, and the Junior Iron Chef program for middle school and high school students, for students to get engaged in learning how to develop culinary skills and lifelong healthy eating habits. So I'll stop there and pass it on to Annie for the higher ed perspective.
Helen, yeah, wow, that's such an amazing story. I think just for campuses, a couple of things. One is that there has been a trend, I feel like, over the last five years of taking out cooking facilities from residential halls. But something we've been working on with that. I think that's, for safety precautions. I think there are fires or kind of different pieces like that. But we've been adding stations called My Kitchen, where students can do some of their own cooking. And I think that sort of having that hands-on sort of also feels like a connection to home too. But also we have been getting more into some culinary education with a new dining hall that UVM built 3 years ago. We added there's a teaching kitchen in that dining hall, and this has sort of was a pre-COVID function, but hopefully it does return. We did have a executive chef of culinary education who's a longtime NECI instructor, who did an amazing job kind of leading classes that included everything from knife skills to sensory, taste, and also teaching classes that aligned with the Harvest of the Month calendar of how to prep these foods at home. We also had a CSA share, kind of how to use the full CSA share. So a lot of work around that. And we're resuming some teaching classes this year, but hopefully it kind of will resume to its full function. But kind of trying to build off of the flow from early childhood to farm to school and continue that into college as then students kind of go off into the world. So it's kind of a neat flow of culinary ed there.
That's great. Well, we just have a couple more minutes because I know Brett wants to give a few closing comments, and she also put in the chat some of the things that are happening as the gathering wraps up today. Just curious if any of you have any left key things you still want to say. Trevor, I know you have a grant opportunity that you may be looking for input on. I don't know if you want to say something about that. If others of you have ways that people can follow your work, with your websites or newsletters, if you want to pop that in the chat for those who are watching, feel free. And I think you all know how to get in touch with our speakers. So let me stop there and just say any other comments that folks want to get in the last minute or two?
I'll take the opportunity to promote the grant program, and more so to just say that, like, my hope is that people find me accessible, and if they have ideas about how the ag agency can engage in improving farm to institution anyway, like, I am very much open to that and would love to hear from anybody. So I can put my contact in the chat, but yeah, we have a local food market development grant program that's been an annual grant. It wasn't available last year due to COVID, but it's back this year. And that's pretty broad focus around farm to institution. So it could be targeted in very specific ways, but understanding kind of what the needs are and what those gaps are is critical to designing programs that have big impacts and meaningful impacts. So again, would just encourage folks to reach out to me if they have thoughts or ideas in any of that.
Great. And I guess just to wrap up, I would say thanks to all of you for sharing your stories. I know there's lots more that all of you could have talked about. We could have done a session on any one of the sectors or institutions because there's a lot there. And you really are providing a lot of leadership and inspiration for those, not only here in Vermont, but around New England and actually nationally. When you think about the size of our brave little state and the impact in this work, it's really astounding. So thanks again, and I hope we all can keep this conversation going, and I'm certain we will. Brett, I think I'll just hand it over to you to wrap up, and hopefully we all get big points for getting however many people we had here finishing on time. So over to you, and thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks so much, everybody. That was a wonderful panel, and thanks so much to all of the presenters. And yeah, I just wanted to wrap things up today and say thank you to everyone who came and participated in this session. Great turnout, and wanted to let you know the schedule for the rest of the day today. We're going to have a break here at 11 for 15 minutes. And then at 11:15, Jake is going to do the local food counts reveal. And then we'll do another quick break. And at 12 o'clock will be the dairy plenary. And then Jake will do his closing remarks at 1 o'clock. So hope you all can continue to participate. I know you all have busy schedules, but would love to see you for the rest of the day today. And yeah, thanks so much to everybody. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks all.
Bye. Bye. Wow. Great session. That was awesome.
Yeah, like amazed that everyone was able to get everything in and get us all in.